Hello, biology students! Let's learn about the cell membrane. We learned about this back in our cells unit, but now we're going to learn it in detail. Let's learn about this bodyguard of the cell. So the cell membrane has a really important function. It is selectively permeable. It only allows some materials to enter or exit. Because of that, we also think of it as selective or semi-permeable. Permeable things let everything through. So selectively permeable only lets some things through. Somewhat permeable. Because of this, the cell membrane helps maintain homeostasis. If it let everything in or out, the cell would get too big, too small, would get bad things like waste in or out that weren't supposed to be moving. So the cell membrane, selectively permeable, helps maintain homeostasis. The major part of the cell membrane is called a phospholipid. Let's make sure we draw and label it in our diagram and in our notes. A phospholipid has two parts to the word, phospho, which sounds familiar from ATP, and lipid, which sounds familiar from macromolecules. This is a molecule that makes up all of the cell membrane. It's the building block of the cell membrane. So, what are the different parts? Well, the first part is this part called the phosphate head. Remember, phosphates look like circles for ATP? Same thing here. There's circles here too. We call that the phosphate head. The lipid is the tail part. Sometimes we refer to it as the fatty acid tails. Alright, so phospholipids are in opposite directions and they make up a two-layer system called a bilayer. Alright, the cell membrane in general is called a phospholipid bilayer. The prefix bi meaning two. So here we see a phospholipid, a phospholipid, a phospholipid, and down here we see the other ones going the other way. To me, they kind of look like hairpins, right? Where the hairpins are going this way and this way, all right? They will have the heads of the phospholipid, or that phosphate head, facing the water part. And that part's really important to note, where the ends of the phospholipid, those lipid tails, they're going the other way. So we think of this part that's touching the water as polar, because water, remember, was polar, and polar things are hydrophilic. Hydrophilic means water loving. Water loving. So these heads are water loving, hydrophilic. The tails, though, are lipids. Think about if you were to ever have salad dressing, which is part water and part oil. Things that are fats or oils hate water. They're scared of water. So we call this hydrophobic, water scared. Lipids or fats or oils are non-polar. And again, we have on the other side of the cell membrane more phosphate heads. We call them, again, water loving. We'll practice this in class, of course. It's a little difficult, but these words are really easy because the word phobic and hydro are usually very familiar. All right, and these look like tails, and this looks like a little head. All right, let's keep going. We consider the cell membrane to be called a fluid mosaic model. Why do we do that? Well, the cell membrane can be thought of as a mosaic. Remember, mosaics from art class are things with lots of little pieces. And the cell membrane has lots of little parts that all come together to make something awesome and complex. Just like how this picture has a lot of little parts that make something awesome and complex. This is the cell membrane with lots of little parts, right? And all those little parts have different names. For biology, at this level, we're going to learn a couple of them. If you were to take a higher level biology class, you'll learn even more. We consider the cell membrane to be fluid. Remember, this term is fluid mosaic because the cell membrane actually moves. This diagram has a little bit of movement. Those phospholipids and the things in them actually move a little bit. Remember, this is floating on water. Think of it as a water floaty. And that movement of many parts is why we call it fluid mosaic. Always in motion. Let's learn some of those parts now. One part that we have to know is the transport protein. To me, the transport protein is like a tunnel, right? It's this purple thing right here. It transports food or waste into or out of the cell. Remember, the cell membrane itself is the bodyguard. Some of these are closed and open, and some of them are always open channels or proteins. All right, notice these proteins? They are like tunnels that allow things in and out. Transport protein. The next one, cholesterol. Cholesterol is this weird thing that looks like honeycomb in yellow. Cholesterol you might have heard from maybe a doctor or a family member. Cholesterol usually isn't a good thing. We don't want too much bad cholesterol in our diet. However, this cholesterol is actually a pretty good thing. It's between those phospholipids that are those hairpin looking structures that make up the cell membrane. And what it does, it allows the cell membrane to have some stability. Think of them as like anchors in between. And they also kind of act like spacers. Think about spacers in between your teeth if you have braces. They allow for stability and fluidity. All right, they're in certain places in the cell membrane where the membrane needs it to be stable or more fluid. All right, so they allow for all that motion we were learning. Great job, guys. Now we've learned about cholesterol, transport proteins, phospholipids, and how this membrane is selectively permeable. Very impressive. We're going to practice this in class. See you then.